The Willow Creek Police Station was unusually silent that night. The hum of the old fluorescent lights overhead was the loudest sound in the room, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling in the cold. Outside, the streets were empty, shrouded in a heavy fog that pressed against the windows like a living thing. Inside, 4 officers sat scattered across the main floor, each wrapped up in the monotony of paperwork and tired conversations, waiting for the night to crawl by. Officer Riley leaned back in his chair, balancing it on 2 legs, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm hours ago. Across the room, Detective Harper typed slowly at his computer, the glow of the screen reflecting in his tired eyes. The rookie, Officer Lewis, tried to keep himself awake by pacing, while Sergeant Kane, the oldest of them, flipped through a folder of unsolved case files with a frown that never seemed to leave his face. It was the kind of night where nothing was supposed to happen, routine, uneventful, and safe. Yet, there was something strange in the air that none of them could quite put their finger on. The heater rattled inconsistently, blowing out short bursts of warm air before falling silent again. Every so often, the radios would hiss with faint static, only to settle back into silence, as if mocking the stillness of the station. The sense of calm felt unnatural, almost staged, as though the building itself was holding its breath. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 3 a.m. The hour most officers called the dead time. When even the roadiest drunks and petty criminals had gone home to sleep, Riley joked under his breath that the only thing they'd be catching that night was a cold. No one laughed. Harper didn't look up from his screen, and Kane muttered something about nights like this being the ones you remembered. Lewis, still restless, finally asked why. The old sergeant only shook his head and told him to wait and see. It was in that heavy quiet, with the officers lulled into the rhythm of a dead shift routine, that the first sense of unease began to creep in. A faint hum in the distance, almost like another set of lights flickering to life, buzzed beneath the floorboards. Lewis froze mid-step, tilting his head as he had heard something the others hadn't. When he asked if anyone else noticed it, no one answered. The sound stopped as quickly as it came, leaving behind only the whisper of the clocks ticking. And a silence so deep it felt alive. The silence of the station broke without warning when the radio on Sergeant Kane's desk hissed sharply to life. At first, it sounded like the usual interference. Static, a faint crackle, nothing worth notice. But then, beneath the static, came the unmistakable sound of a voice. It was faint, garbled, as though someone were whispering into the receiver from a great distance. The words were unclear, but the tone was desperate. Everyone froze. Riley lowered his coffee slowly, Lewis stopped pacing mid-step, and Harper's hands hovered above his keyboard as the voice faded into static again. Kane leaned forward, pressing the receiver close to his ear. "Dispatch, repeat your last transmission," he said, his voice firm but calm. There was no response, only the sound of heavy breathing, followed by what could have been a single cry for help. Then silence. A few seconds later, the same voice returned, only clearer this time, the words stretched with panic. "Help, inside." And then the signal cut off completely. The 4 officers exchanged uneasy glances. Harper was the first to speak, insisting the signal had to be coming from outside the building. But Kane's expression hardened. "No," he said, tapping the screen of the console. The frequency wasn't external. It was broadcasting from their own station's line. Someone, or something, had made the call from inside. Riley laughed nervously, muttering about faulty equipment, but his voice cracked slightly at the end. betraying the fear they all felt. Lewis moved toward the main hallway, his eyes darting between the shadowed corridors. If it came from here, he said, then where? The question hung in the air unanswered. The long, darkened hall beyond the lobby suddenly seemed much larger, much more ominous, as though the walls themselves held secrets. The thought that a stranger, or worse, was lurking somewhere within the station made the once safe space feel alien. Before anyone could move, the radio screeched again, this time louder, shrill, almost painful to hear. It wasn't a voice this time, but a sound like metal scraping against metal, echoing through the speakers until Kane slammed the receiver down. The noise stopped instantly, plunging the room back into stillness. No one spoke. Each officer could feel it now. The sense of being watched, the weight of something unseen pressing down on the station. And though the building hadn't changed, it suddenly felt less like a workplace, and more like a trap. The station lights flickered once, twice, and then cut out completely, plunging the room into a suffocating darkness. For a few seconds, no one moved. The only sound the panicked breaths of the officers, as they scrambled to adjust. The emergency lights finally kicked on, washing the hallways in a dim, blood-red glow. The building felt different under that crimson hue, less like a place of law and order, and more like a crime scene waiting to happen. Then it came. A piercing scream that tore through the silence, echoing from the direction of the evidence room. It was sharp, desperate, and short-lived, silenced in an instant. The officers jumped to their feet, instincts kicking in, weapons drawn. Kane barked an order to move, and the four of them rushed down the hallway, their boots pounding against the tiled floor, hearts racing faster than their steps. When they reached the evidence room, the door was ajar, creaking slowly, as though someone had just slipped through. Harper pushed it open cautiously, flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. That's when they saw him. Officer Riley slumped against the wall, his eyes wide in frozen terror, his throat slit clean open. His lifeless hand still clutched his service weapon, as though he had tried to draw it, but hadn't been fast enough. Blood pooled beneath him, seeping toward the door like it was trying to escape the room itself. Lewis staggered back, his face pale, muttering that Riley had been right behind them only minutes ago. Kane crouched, examining the scene with grim precision. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered locks, nothing missing from the shelves. Whoever had done this hadn't broken in. They had been waiting. Harper swung his flashlight across the room, and for the briefest second, it caught something metallic. A glint of steel. Before disappearing into the darkness at the far end of the shelves. The officers raised their weapons, shouting for whoever was there to show themselves. No reply came. Instead, the silence returned. Heavy and suffocating, as though the scream and the kill had been swallowed by the walls themselves. The evidence room was empty, or at least, it appeared that way. But the feeling of being stalked, of unseen eyes moving, just beyond the reach of the flashlights, was undeniable. Riley's body was only the beginning, and they all knew it. Detective Harper stormed back to the control room, his nerves frayed. Determined to find answers in the only place that might still hold the truth. The station's surveillance system. The monitors flickered under the dim, red glow of emergency power, each screen showing a different corner of the building. He jabbed at the keyboard, switching between camera feeds, his jaw tightening with every frame. And then he saw it. On the grainy black and white footage, a tall figure appeared at the far end of the east hallway, moving with an unnatural calmness, dragging something heavy along the wall. Sparks flashed as metal scraped against tile. What the hell? Harper whispered. Sergeant Kane leaned over his shoulder, narrowing his eyes at the screen. The figure was wrapped in a hooded sweatshirt, the front soaked in something dark that glistened in the low light. In his right hand, he carried a knife so long it looked more like a hunting blade than anything you'd find on the street. But it wasn't just the knife, or the hood, or the sheer size of him, it was his face. Or rather, the absence of it. The camera seemed unable to capture his features, as though the shadows themselves erased his identity. The officers turned toward the east hallway in unison, expecting to see the figure standing there, waiting for them. But when Harper swung his flashlight down the corridor, it was empty. The floor was clean, the walls unmarked, no sparks, no sound. Yet on the monitor, the hooded figure was still there. Closer now, dragging his knife along the wall, leaving behind a trail of gouges that didn't exist in reality. That's impossible, Lewis muttered, his voice cracking as he stepped back from the screen. Suddenly, the cameras began to cycle on their own, flipping through feeds without Harper's touch. Every hallway, every stairwell, every cell block. There he was, the hooded man, moving with steady purpose, each time closer than the last. In one feed, he stood by the evidence room. In another, he loomed in the locker hall. And then, for a single unbearable second, the monitors all went black. When the image returned, the figure was standing in the main lobby, directly behind the officers watching the screen. They spun around, weapons raised, but the lobby was empty, bathed only in that dim red light. Nothing moved, nothing stirred. But the cameras told a different story. On the monitor, the hooded figure remained, frozen in place behind them, knife glinting as he waited. The officers were trapped between two realities, the one their eyes could see, and the one the cameras refused to lie about. Kane tried to steady his men, barking orders with the authority of years in uniform. Why sweep the station, top to bottom? Whatever's in here, we flush it out. The officers tightened their grips on their weapons, the air thick with tension. They split into pairs, Harper and Lewis covering the west wing, while Kane stayed with the rookie at the main desk, their radios crackling faintly in the silence. For the first time that night, the police station no longer felt like a place of safety. It felt like hostile ground. As Harper and Lewis crept down the west corridor, the overhead bulbs flickered violently, buzzing like angry insects before going dark altogether. Only the weak beams of their flashlights cut through the black. Each step they took echoed louder than it should have, bouncing back unnaturally off the walls, as though the hallway were stretching, warping around them. Lewis whispered that he could hear footsteps behind them, but when Harper turned his light back, the hall was empty. Then, without warning, the radios came alive again. At first, it was static, sharp, piercing, like nails against glass. But underneath it grew a low, guttural laugh. It wasn't coming from dispatch, and it wasn't interference. The laugh grew louder, filling every channel, echoing in their earpieces like the killer was inside the very wires. Harper yanked his radio free and hurled it to the floor, shattering it. But the laughter didn't stop. It was coming from Lewis's unit too, and from Kane's across the station. Back at the main desk, Kane's face hardened as he heard it, his rookie pale as a sheet. "Turn it off, turn it off," the rookie begged, fumbling with his radio. But before he could, the voice shifted. Through the static, a whisper slithered into Kane's ear. "I'm right behind you." He spun around, weapon raised, but the lobby was empty. The rookie backed into a corner, eyes darting wildly, convinced that any shadow could come alive. It was no longer clear who was in control. the armed officers, or the phantom stalking them. Every door they tried to open slammed shut on its own, locks clicking as though the station itself was betraying them. The halls grew colder, the silence heavier, broken only by the occasional drag of metal against tile echoing from somewhere too close. The hunters had become prey, and every step forward only deepened the sense that they were walking straight into his game, with the radios now nothing more than channels for taunts. Harper pushed for the group to regroup and head somewhere. The killer couldn't toy with them so easily. Kane hesitated but finally agreed, leading the surviving officers toward the basement archives. The descent was slow, their flashlights casting long shadows that danced along the stairwell walls. The air grew colder with every step down, the kind of damp chill that seeped into bones and made breathing harder. The basement had always been the least used part of the station. More storage than workspace, and it felt like crossing into a different world entirely. The heavy metal door groaned as Kane forced it open, revealing rows of dusty shelves stacked with boxes, old files, and forgotten evidence bags. The emergency lights didn't reach this far, so their flashlights were the only thing keeping the dark at bay. Dust swirled in the air, glittering in the beams, disturbed by their movements, as if the basement hadn't been touched in years. Lewis muttered that it smelled like a tomb, and Harper, though he kept quiet, couldn't shake the feeling that the rookie was right. Harper sifted through the shelves, desperate for anything that might explain the nightmare unfolding above. His beam landed on a stack of thick case files, their paper yellowed and edges curled. He pulled one free, brushing off a layer of grime, and froze when he saw the name Elias Crowe. The others crowded around as Harper flipped the file open, revealing grainy crime scene photos, handwritten notes, and a mugshot of a man whose eyes seemed alive even on paper. The details spilled out. Crowe had been a serial killer, arrested in Willow Creek years ago, after ambushing officers in this very building. Lewis read aloud from a page, his voice trembling. Executed by lethal injection, 1998. Last words: "I'll be back for you all when the lights go out." The words hung in the stale air like a curse, echoing too perfectly with everything happening upstairs. Kane ripped the file from his hands, his jaw set. But even he couldn't disguise the way his fingers trembled. The rookie swore it was impossible, that Crowe was dead. But Harper pointed out what they had already seen. The hooded figure, the radio signals, the laughter that no living man could transmit across every frequency at once. Before anyone could argue, a low thud reverberated through the basement, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. It came again, louder this time, from the far corner of the archive, where the shadows seemed thicker than they should be. Harper lifted his flashlight, but the beam faltered, flickering weakly before dying altogether. Kane cursed under his breath as the others' lights began to sputter too, one by one, leaving only fragments of illumination in the suffocating dark. Somewhere ahead, a slow, deliberate scrape of metal against concrete echoed through the basement, and with it came a whisper, hoarse, amused, and far too close. "Still think I'm dead?" The basement door slammed shut above them, with a metallic clang that echoed down the stairwell, like a prison gate locking into place. Kane lunged for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It wasn't just locked. It felt welded shut, as if something unseen was holding it closed. Harper ordered everyone to stay calm, though his own voice betrayed cracks of panic. The air was thicker now, heavy with the coppery tang of blood, though no one could see where the smell came from. The only sound was the steady tick of Harper's wristwatch, marking every agonizing second. Then, without warning, the building roared back to life. The emergency generator kicked on, flooding the basement and upper levels with blinding fluorescent light. For a heartbeat, the station looked normal again. Sterile, quiet, lifeless. Lewis gasped in relief, muttering that maybe it had all been a trick of the doc. But Harper wasn't convinced. He scanned the rows of shelves, searching for movement, his gut telling him the nightmare wasn't over. As they climbed back toward the main floor, the silence grew wrong. Too perfect, too complete. When they reached the lobby, the sight that greeted them turned their relief into horror. Every desk, every chair, every surface was smeared with thick, dripping blood. Papers were soaked crimson, phones knocked off their hooks, computer screens flickering with distorted static. Yet there were no bodies. The other officers, the ones who had been on duty earlier, were gone. Vanished, as though they had been swallowed whole by the station itself. Harper's flashlight beam caught movement at the far end of the room. A figure was sitting in the chief's chair, leaning back casually as if he had been there all along. The hood was gone now, revealing a pale, gaunt face with sharp features and eyes that glowed faintly under the flickering light. Elias Crowe, the same face from the decades-old mugshot, only younger, untouched by time. His lips curled into a smile, wide and mocking, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. The officers raised their weapons, their hands trembling. But Crowe didn't move. He simply tilted his head, as though listening to something only he could hear, and then whispered across the lobby in a voice that carried far too clearly for the distance. Lights out. Instantly, every bulb in the station shattered, plunging them back into darkness. The sound of glass raining down was drowned out by something far worse. A chorus of screams that didn't belong to any of them, but came from every corner of the building at once. When the screams finally faded, silence reclaimed the station. The air was heavy, the darkness absolute. Not a single officer was ever seen leaving Willow Creek that night. The next morning, when backup arrived, the building was pristine. No blood, no broken glass, no signs of a struggle. The only thing out of place was the chief's chair, slowly rocking back and forth, as if someone had just been sitting there. And on the desk in front of it, scratched deep into the wood with a blade, were 3 chilling words: IGHTS Duo OUT.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.